collaboration, encourage
Testing 1, 2, 3.
including those of your employer, and matters that we're discussing. And then finally, panel, if you have any ethics questions, please see me separately, and if needed, I'll put you in contact with a NASA ethics attorney. Thanks for bearing with me. I'd now like to turn to the amazing Dr. Nikki Fox, Associate Administrator for NASA's Science Mission Directorate. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to all the members of NASA's UAP Independent Study Team. Your selfless dedication to the pursuit of knowledge is just so commendable. And I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in today to watch our first deliberative meeting of NASA's Independent Study Team on evaluating and categorizing unidentified anomalous phenomena. Before I begin, though, I really do want to double down on Dan's words that it is really disheartening to hear of the harassment that our panelists have faced online, all because they're studying this topic. NASA stands behind our panelists, and we do not tolerate abuse. Harassment only leads to further stigmatization of the UAP field, significantly hindering the scientific progress and discouraging others to study this important subject matter. Your harassment also obstructs the public's right to knowledge. Our panelists are leading experts in the scientific, aeronautics, and data analytics communities. We are very lucky to have them on board to share their invaluable insights to inform NASA on what possible data could be collected in the future and how it can be collected to help us better understand the nature of UAP. The UAP Independent Study was commissioned to create a roadmap on how to use the tools of science to evaluate and categorize the nature of UAPs going forward. This roadmap, of course, will help the federal government obtain usable data to explain the nature of future UAPs. Transparency, openness, and scientific integrity are pinnacle to NASA's mission. They're at the forefront of this public meeting and have been throughout the team's 7 months on this study. As Dan noted, this is a working meeting, and so the public will have the incredible opportunity to witness the process of science in action. At NASA, we lead the world in exploration and are committed to rigorous scientific inquiry. The nature of science is to better understand the unknown, and to do that, our scientists need data. Right now, there is very limited number of high-quality observations and data curation of UAP. The existing data available from eyewitness reports are often muddled and cannot provide conclusive evidence that supports UAP recognition and analysis. Additionally, an object's background can complicate the data further and render it unusable due to conventional objects that can mimic or overshadow the phenomena completely, such as commercial aircraft, military equipment, the weather, and ionospheric phenomena like auroras. This lack of high-quality data make it impossible to draw scientific conclusions on the nature of UAP. Now, this team has used unclassified data from civilian government entities, commercial data, and data from other sources to inform their recommendations. And as Dan noted, they will be published in a public report that comes out this summer. I want to emphasize that there is really great benefit to studying unclassified data rather than classified data for this study. First, unidentified anomalous phenomena sightings themselves are not classified. It's often the sensor platform that is classified. And you can kind of think of it, if a fighter jet took a picture of the Statue of Liberty, then that image would be classified, not because of the subject in the picture, but because of the sensors on the plane. Second, unclassified data make it possible for our team to communicate openly to advance our understanding of UAP, not only with each other, but across the scientific community and to the public. This ensures a clear and transparent pipeline of information that can be built upon through generations to expand our understanding. This study relies on open data. Everything we use at NASA is open, and anyone can look at these records. So I invite you to visit our open data portal at data.nasa.gov to comb through our tens of thousands of data sets that are free and fully accessible to the public. Additionally, please check out data.gov/open/data for a great overview of where you can find the archives for our science and mission data sites. I am very, very much looking forward to hearing the deliberations put forth today from our distinguished
So the
panel
head of
of
NASA
experts.
said he's seen
Thank you so much for
classified
being here.
data, and it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up.
Before you go, just
But they're
want to
telling us
open up to questions.
they're not
Let me
using any of
start
the
with,
classified data.
a question on this on the NASA data. I think one of the important things that we'll be looking at with other data sets and events is the data is not very well calibrated. Mm-hmm. Can you say just a little bit about how NASA goes through calibrating some of its Earth science data?
Oh, yes. I mean, we very, very rigorous Earth science. I mean, all of our data sets, not just Earth science, go through extremely rigorous calibration. We don't release anything until it's really perfect. I mean, we have quick look data that is marked as quick look data. So, you know, you can use it to get
So for those of you who don't know,
findings,
this is
but
the
wait
NASA
for the really
UFO
nicely cleaned up data. So
study group,
a lot of
and
rigorous
it's their first public
protocol
report.
in putting out our data to make sure it is perfect.
Which, by the way, they expect this to be 4 hours long.
Do we have any other questions from the panel?
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Nice, Simon.
Hi, I'm David
Ask them where the
Struggle.
moon landing
I'm
footage
the
went. That's
chair
what
of the
I'd like to
panel.
know. It really did disappear
And
too.
we
You can't make that up.
charge. We have a lengthy charge, but the high-level summary of it is how can NASA contribute to understanding the nature of UAPs?
They say they actually
our role
recorded
here
over
It's not to resolve
moon
the nature
landing
of these
tapes.
events, but rather to give NASA guidance, to provide a roadmap of how it can contribute. To
Probably the
this area.
most historically significant
After
VHS tapes in the
my
history
opening remarks,
of
we'll hear from
mankind.
John Kirkpatrick from the
And what they use them for
AARO,
to
and
record
it's the
old
AARO
episodes of
that's charged
the
with
A-Team.
leading the whole of government UAP effort. And they've already issued some preliminary reports on some of the events. NASA's role is to use its unique capabilities and its role as a civilian agency interacting with the scientific community in an open and transparent manner. And, as Dr. Fox emphasized, the Defense and Intelligence Agency data on UAP are often classified primarily because of how the data is collected, not because what's in the data. If a camera on an F-35 took a
Love the
picture of a
A-Team,
bird,
man.
it's classified.
I love it when a
If a
plan
spy
comes together.
satellite takes an image of a balloon, and we've had in the news some balloons recently.
I will say I'm on board here with what they're saying.
And
I
that's
guess
because of a
that
desire to not reveal
it could be the platform, the
technical capabilities
photograph
to
taking
other
or video taking
nations.
platform that's classified, not
NASA, on the
necessarily
other
what's
hand,
in it.
operates in a mode where
That
it's
makes
collecting
sense.
data in the open. And the NASA data is available on websites and is well characterized. And because of NASA being the civilian agency studying air and space, it has a special role to play. And I see our charge primarily as helping identify for NASA ways it could play that role and contribute to understanding. We've gone through a preliminary data collection stage. And to summarize some of the things that we've learned, the current data collection efforts regarding UAPs are unsystematic and fragmented.
It was a good analogy they made. If the fighter jet takes a picture of the Statue of Liberty, that picture is classified not because of the subject, the Statue of Liberty, but because of the platform that took the
picture. In many ways, what we'd like to think of as citizen science. But again, it is uncalibrated data, poorly characterized, not well curated. And we face, looking through this data, a significant background, a background of many of these events are commercial aircraft, civilian and military drones, weather and research balloons, military equipment, ionospheric phenomenon. We need to characterize how, when the data
it was
is
said
taken,
that this
when it
task
sees
force was
events
going to be
like
given
this first.
$200,000 for this UFO
The
study.
current existing data
And we just
and
couldn't help
eyewitness
but wonder,
reports alone
what are they going
are
to find out
insufficient
for
to provide conclusive
$200,000?
evidence about the nature and origin of every UAP event. They're often uninformative due to lack of quality control and data curation. To understand UAP better, targeted data collection, thorough data curation, and robust
Also, friend of the
analysis
show,
data.
Avi Loeb, threw some major
Such an
shade
approach will help
at
to
the
discern
NASA UFO
unexplained
task
UAP
force
sightings,
yesterday or
but
this morning.
even then, there's no guarantee that all sightings will be explained.
He said, yeah, if they're going to recommend studying UFOs,
Another challenge in this
guess
area
what?
is what we call
The
stigma.
Galileo
There's a real
Project has
stigma
already been studying
among
UFOs for
people
the last 2
reporting events.
years.
And despite NASA's extensive efforts to reduce this stigma, the origin of the UAPs remain
Oh, it's such a low number.
unclear,
It's kind of laughable,
and
right,
we
Simon?
feel
Like,
many
all these
events
people
remain
involved
unreported.
over this amount of time,
Commercial pilots, for example, are very reluctant
what are they
to
really
report
getting for
anomalies.
$200,000?
And one of our goals in having NASA play
But
a
maybe we'll
role
find out.
is to remove stigma and get high quality data. In fact, if I were to summarize in one line, what
So I have a
feel we've
drinking
learned,
game here.
it's we need high quality data.
We have to
And
take a
this is
shot
not some, as
every
a
time they say data.
research scientist whose work has been primarily focused in cosmology, I would say the lesson of my career
Do I have a
has
shot
been,
sound? Let's see.
you want to address important questions. You
Yeah,
need high
maybe.
quality data with well calibrated
Data.
instruments. So let me now introduce the agenda. We're going to hear from a number of experts who will be presenting up to lunch. We'll then break at 12 for lunch, from 12 to 12:30. At 12:30, we'll resume, and we'll have presentations by members of the panel on some preliminary ideas for discussion. And that will be a period of time for some open discussion by the panel. We will then have a Q&A session based on questions that have been sent in advance to the website, and we've curated those questions and grouped them together, and we'll be going through a lot of those questions, and then we'll summarize. And then over the subsequent couple months, we'll work on putting together the report.
Oh, you
And as
better
Dan
believe
said,
they've been
we're aiming to make a public report available, we
accumulating
hope by the
data
end of July.
for a long time.
So
I
now
want to know
let me
where's
turn
the,
this over
where's the Air
to
Force?
Sean Kilpatrick.
Hang on.
Ah, the
We'll
head
do a
of
couple
Aero.
Q&As.
There he
Oh,
is,
we'll have some
Dr.
Q&A from
Kirkpatrick.
me? Okay.
From the panel.
Any questions on the panel? Thoughts? Yes. We'll get the mic.
Yeah. So one of the things I think Dr. Fox said was looking at the release of data, very important for our study, when it's high quality. And you have also commented that data are not always perfect when we're doing certain studies. I wonder if you could shed some light on the difference between the application of certain data to certain scientific challenges.
We're taking a shot every time the word data is used.
So, when you
I got to go get my coffee.
Your camera is often designed to take an image in the daytime and might not be optimized for nighttime imaging. Or if you take something that astronomers are very familiar with, is we design our telescopes to work at night. And if the sun is not even, if you would never take the Hubble telescope and point it at the sun. This would destroy its detectors. Not only that, if the telescope is pointing there and the sun is over there, even though you're not looking at the sun, reflections off of the optics will produce what we call ghosting. And that kind of ghosting produces some very strange images. And this, one of the many things we need to worry about when we see unusual things taken from a camera is, even if you're pointing the camera there, was the sun over there? Those kinds of anomalies degrade the quality of the
Drunk on data.
And that's why it's very important to work with well-characterized instruments and to be, using.
I have a friend in data.
You understand what's going on.
For Halloween, he
So
has this like Daredevil costume with the DD on the chest.
Data taken
But
from
he's
the
not.
James
Oh,
Webb
shot.
telescope, the Hubble,
But he's not
these things, and
Daredevil. He's dirty
telescopes
data.
looking out in space. You'll see some really, at first funny phenomenon. When a telescope points at a star that's bright, it saturates the detector and puts bleeding down the detector. And you'll see phenomenon like if there's a bright star off to the side of the, not even when you're looking at, you get this effects where light bounces off of dust in your telescope and produces a sort of diffuse image that has some really strange properties. So, when you see something unusual, the first thing you have to do is understand how that data was taken. And I think this is one of the challenges one faces when you have data taken by uncalibrated instruments years ago. It's very hard to know what's taken. It's very hard to draw conclusions. I think that's one of the challenges with archival data. And I think having
Simon, make it stop.
Dedicated, well-calibrated instruments.
Our friend James has this poker group. They're on GroupMe, and they keep messaging about their poker night. That's the sound you're hearing.
Anomalies are so often the engine of discovery. Maybe you could say a quick word about high-risk, high-reward research in your field of cosmology and how you see that impacting the UAP study as well.
So, an area that comes to mind is fast radio bursts. And the Shaw Prize was just announced yesterday, awarded to the discovery of fast radio bursts. And these are these bursting signals that go off all over in space. And it's an interesting story because Some of the bursts were real and are fascinating. And some of the bursts, there was a series of bursts observed by this observatory in Australia. And really strange structure. And people couldn't figure out what was going on. And then they started to notice a lot of them bunched together around lunchtime. And what had happened was the people at the observatory would heat up their lunch in the microwave. And something they would do is they would open the door of the microwave oven before the microwave stopped. This is bad for your microwave oven. It wears it out. But not only that, it produced a burst of radio signal that was picked up by these sensitive detectors. So this, I think, is an interesting lesson. Some events end up being something unusual and conventional, but some events with these FRBs turn out to be these powerful explosions, which are taking place at cosmological distances. Their nature is still not fully understood. I think they're one of the really most fascinating objects we have, these bursts going out all over space. They're interesting probes because they're kind of lighting up space between here and there. And they're a subject of very active research. And if one looks at the history of these FRBs, at first they were discovered, not believed, then finally confirmed. And they were discovered by instruments that were very sensitive, but not optimized for this. And now what we're doing is we're optimizing instruments and optimizing software to look for these events. And it's often these surprises that turn out to be most interesting. And, there are phenomena like sprites, which you can think of as upward going lightning, which were seen by commercial pilots and somewhat not believed, right? Because they were very strange. And it was really only when we were able to take very high speed imaging data, data taken often from places like the space station, that we were able to see that and learn about these fascinating ionospheric phenomena. So it's surprises are really interesting. I mean, I think this is one of the fascinating things about the UAP phenomenon. If it's something that's anomalous, that makes it interesting and worthy of study. Other questions? Great.
Make
So
sure
now
to
let
tune
me
in tonight
turn
at
it over
9
to
p.m.
Sean.
Eastern. We welcome Paul Bebon and Andrew Bustamante from the History Channel's new show, Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. Oh, was there a shot? Hold on, I got my
David, Dan,
shot.
it's a pleasure to be back. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking NASA for convening today's UAP Independent Study public meeting and inviting me to continue to participate. NASA has been an invaluable partner to our team at AERO as we work to better understand and respond to unidentified anomalous phenomena. We applaud NASA for commissioning its independent study team and for exploring what data and tools could be leveraged to shed greater light on UAP. Though NASA and AERO are taking on very different aspects of the UAP problem set, our efforts are very much complementary. We both are committed to the scientific method, to a data-driven approach, and the highest standards of scientific research integrity. While NASA is evaluating unclassified data sources for its study, AERO's data set includes classified material with a focus on national security areas. However, all of this data collectively is critical to understanding the nature and origin of UAP.
Shot.
NASA brings unique capabilities, world-class scientists.
This is Dr.
and a
Kirkpatrick,
wealth
the head of
academic and
AERO.
research linkages. NASA also has access to Earth sensing satellites, radiological sensors, tools for gravitational wave, geomagnetic wave detection, and means for analyzing open source
all-domain
and crowdsourced data that may
anomalous
assist both AERO and NASA in their
research
UAP efforts.
organization.
We are very grateful for the partnership and welcome the opportunity to join with NASA to share our collective findings with the public as the U.S. government moves towards greater transparency on this issue. Last month, I testified before members of the Senate Armed Services Committee on emerging threats and capabilities and shared some of the progress made since AARO's establishment in July 2022. I discussed AARO's scientific and analytic approaches, its efforts to improve UAP data collection, standardize our reporting processes, leverage our partnerships, and meticulously review the U.S. government's UAP-related historical records. As I told the subcommittee then, the resolution of all UAP cases cannot be accomplished by DoD and the intelligence community alone. AARO's ultimate success will require partnerships with the interagency, industry, academia, the scientific community, and the public, which all bring their own resources, ideas, and expertise to the UAP challenge. We believe robust collaboration and peer review across a broad range of partners will promote greater objectivity and transparency in the study of UAP. Of course, NASA's UAP independent study team was convened very much in that spirit. I also emphasized to Congress that only a very small percentage of UAP reports display signatures that could reasonably be described as anomalous. The majority of unidentified objects reported to AARO and in our holdings
We're going to find out any
demonstrate
more about
mundane
the orb
characteristics
today.
of readily explainable sources. While a large number of cases in AARO's holdings remain technically unresolved, this is primarily due to a lack of data associated with those cases. Very much along the lines of what David was just speaking about. Without sufficient data, we are unable to reach defendable conclusions that meet the high scientific standards we set for resolution. Meanwhile, for the few objects that do demonstrate potentially anomalous characteristics, AARO is approaching these cases with the highest level of objectivity and analytic rigor. This includes physical testing and employing modeling and simulation to validate our analyses and the underlying theories, and then peer reviewing those results before reaching any conclusions. AARO has shared these cases with the appropriately cleared NASA team members in order to discuss and help recommend potential scientific areas of study that NASA may want to take lead on. I'll underscore here, as I did before Congress, that AARO's work will take time if we are committed to doing it right. AARO is committed to the highest standards of scientific research integrity, as we know our partners at NASA are as well. Thanks again to NASA for hosting this public forum for UAP discussion and information exchange. And I'd like to turn to a brief presentation that includes some recently declassified footage and trends for discussion. Next slide, please. So some of you probably saw a version of this at the open hearing last month. This is an overall review of all of the analytic trends of all the cases that we have to date. While the numbers may have changed a little bit, the overall trends remain the same. Most of what we are seeing reported by aircraft are at the altitudes where we fly.
Check out the radio
aircraft.
signatures,
That
1
should
to
not
3
be a
gigahertz.
surprise. You will note, however, that I have no space reports and I have no maritime reports. That is notable, even though we are looking across all of those domains. On the upper right, we have UAP morphologies. The vast majority of what has been reported and what we have data on, a little less than half now, are orbs, round spheres. And in the bottom right, you will see in the heat map of the areas where we get most of our reporting. This is very much a collection biased map. This is where our sensors are, our military, NRIC, and some of the FAA data. In the middle, it is what we call our typical UAP characteristics for the vast majority of the cases that we see. One way of looking at that is we'll call it a target package. This is the thing we are out hunting for in most cases. Next slide, please. This is an example of one that I showed at the hearing recently. This is a spherical orb, metallic.
Here we go,
Middle
the
East,
orb.
2022 by an MQ-9. I will come back to the sensor question that David raised here in a moment. This is a typical example of the thing that we see most of. We see these all over the world, and we see these in and making very interesting apparent maneuvers. This one in particular, however, I would point out, demonstrated no enigmatic technical capabilities and was no threat to airborne safety. While we are still looking at it, I don't have any more data other than that. And so being able to come to some conclusion is going to take time until we can get better resolved data on similar objects that we can then do a larger analysis on. Next slide, please. I'm going to let this play through. This is a newly released video. You'll notice there are two dots moving back and forth. There is a plane at the bottom that's moving across the screen, and now there are three dots moving back and forth. The moving back and forth is from the sensor and the platform that's collecting it. This is a P3 on a training mission in the Western United States. They picked these up and they tried to intercept and was unable to intercept them. Apart from that motion, and you'll see a little bit of defocusing from the sensor itself, there is no other oddity about this, except for the fact that they couldn't catch them. The reason they couldn't catch them is because after further analysis, it was shown that those objects were actually much farther away from the P3 than they thought. And in fact, when we went even deeper, looked at air traffic control data, we were able to match those to aircraft on a major flight corridor heading into a major airport for landing. This is the kind of thing that can spoof and or provide misperception of both very highly trained pilots as well as sensors, right? And this was reported as an odd grouping of 3 UAP. All right. That is not to say that the pilots didn't know what they were looking at, or they knew what they were looking at, but they weren't really sure. But it also is meant to say that when they're not sure, they're reporting it now. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. And then we have to go look at it. Next slide, please. That brings us to really what is Aero doing in the science and technical realm. So this is one of those areas that I'm going to expound a little bit more on than we did in the last hearings. Aero has a robust scientific plan that we are required to then provide to Congress here pretty soon. One of the first things that we're doing is looking across all the existing sensor data against that typical UAP target that I gave you up at the very first slide. That goes beyond DoD and IC sensors. That's commercial, that's civil, and with partnership with NASA sensors and NOAA sensors. Understanding if any of these Earth sensing satellites, any of these airborne platforms, any of these ground radars, whether it's FAA or other, can actually see these things, given what we've got so far, is going to be an important first step to understanding which sensors are going to be relevant. From there, we are augmenting with dedicated sensors that we've purpose-built, designed to detect, track, and characterize those particular objects. We will be then putting those out in very select areas for surveillance purposes. Partnerships with academia, exploring the signatures to match to our data. So understanding if a thing is moving and if it is doing certain anomalous activities, what are the signatures we would expect to see? How do we pull on that? And then from there, how do I tune my collection architecture to go after it? Statistical analytic techniques. We're working with a couple of universities on how do I do broader based statistical analysis on unclassified and classified data so that I can apply those analytics to our holdings. And then AI and ML analytic techniques for searching out through the data what are the objects, what are the targets that we're going after. We have partnerships with both DoD and DOE labs to explore our current state-of-the-art fundamental physics of UAP observations, both current and historical. In other words, if I have objects, those few that are doing some things that are anomalous, what is our current understanding of maneuverability, speed, signature management, propulsion? What are those underlying signatures that we would expect to see, and how do I then pull on that? Our interagency and allied partnerships for calibration of our capabilities. This is exactly what David was pointing at. A vast majority of what we have reported
So one
to
thing we
us are
discovered
DoD
recently,
sensors.
when talking to
DoD
Robert
sensors
Bob
are not
Salas,
scientific
witness of the
sensors. They are not
1967
intelligence community
Maelstrom
sensors.
Air Force Base
Believe it or not,
nuclear
intelligence
UFO
community
incident,
sensors are very close to scientific
so
sensors.
he
They
was
are
interviewed
calibrated,
by
they are high
Arrow
precision, they
recently,
are
in February, I
everything
think.
you'd ever want to know about a thing. DoD sensors have one purpose. They are to identify an object that is known.
But we still have yet to hear about any of these such interviews with actual
right, predominantly. So understanding how do you calibrate those against
in-person
these known
UFO
objects?
witnesses.
How do I fly an F-35 against a weather balloon at different speeds and different altitudes and different sun conditions and different lighting conditions and heating conditions? Those are all important measurements.
Maelstrom
that need
incident,
to be done, and we
the
are
UFO
in
supposedly
process
shut
of
down
doing that
10
right now.
nuclear
That
warheads
table on the right
in
is a
Montana.
very simplified version of our entire test matrix, which you would not be able to fit on 3 of these slides.
Arrow was
Against
tasked
all of our sensors
famously at the
across all of those
first
phenomenologies.
UFO congressional
That
hearing
will be
to look
useful in order
into
to
the
then train our
Maelstrom
operators,
incident.
pilots, and sensors against the known object.
Bob Salas says they interviewed him.
And then finally,
gave a
our pattern of
presentation.
life analysis. This
We have
is
yet to hear
essentially
anything on this from
baselining
Arrow,
what is
though.
normal. I have all these hotspot areas, but we only have hotspot areas because that's when the reports come in from the operators that are operating at that time. They don't operate all the time. So to have a 24/7 collection monitoring campaign in some of these areas for 3 months at a time is going to be necessary in order to measure out what is normal. Then I'll know what is not normal, right? When we have additional things that come through those spaces. And that includes space and maritime. Next slide, please. Which brings me to some of my recommendations for the panel and their consideration and deliberation. Some of these we're going to be exploring with our new NASA embed, whom I'm happy to be welcoming on pretty soon, who's going to help us in our scientific plan. Crowdsourcing unclassified open source data. This is where, some of the public can be helpful. Imagery from an iPhone is generally not helpful unless you are right up on whatever it is you're looking at. However, some of the ancillary data that your iPhone provides, from location to speed to other phenomenologies, and more than one of those can be very helpful. Right? Large-scale ground-based scientific instrumentation. Evaluating how can I use some of these other instruments for detection. The FRB
It says peer-reviewed
example
parameterization
was
of advanced
perfect, right?
capabilities not
You
yet
have a bunch of
engineered.
large-scale instruments that were not designed.
So why do
for
they never
that,
tell
yet
us
they
about
picked them up
these? All they're
because
saying
it
is
was a microwave.
it's within the realms of our
Well,
physics.
We have a
The other side said
surrogate target
up to Mach
package
2
of
speed, no
what we
big deal.
think these things are, at least from
But now they talk
what
about
we've got
peer-reviewed
reported to us that was
parameterization of
in the front
advanced capabilities
slide.
not yet engineered.
Understanding how can I evaluate that against all of these other instruments, and do any of them have a chance of picking anything up that would be helpful in tipping and cueing us to get other sensors on target. I think leading that evaluation of the scientific ground-based sensors would be useful. Also, the same thing for the Earth Sciences satellites, as we mentioned before. Intentional vice coincidental collection. So looking at how can I provide a tip and cue to both the ground and space-based scientific and academic sensor community to put additional sensors on a object.
Dr. Kirkpatrick himself co-authored a paper with Avi Loeb about alien
the
mothership
joint staff,
seeding the Earth
the
with probes.
commands for when they get tip and cue. Right?
So again,
so
why
pilot
all
says
this
something, they
mundane
see something,
talk
they
of
report it
balloons
in, and we're going to turn on a whole bunch of new collection to go after it. I should be able to hand that
tricks
same
of the
tip and
camera
cue
and
to the
refractions
scientific
from
and
the
academic
sun.
community. So looking at how that works would be helpful. Peer reviewing advanced capabilities, the parameterization and the publication of that have not yet been engineered. We understand a lot of fundamental physics. It is the scientific community's responsibility to explore and document those fundamentals in peer-reviewed scientific journals to match to data so that we can weed out all kinds of different hypotheses, right? That's how science works. We need to make sure that we are doing that. I think leading that conversation would be very helpful from NASA's perspective. Archived scientific data. So we have a whole bunch of calibrated, large-scale scientific data from all these different instrumentations around the world. Taking a look at how can you apply maybe some AI ML tools to search through that data for anomalous signatures that may correlate to things that we've got reporting on. That would be an interesting study. Distributions of sightings. I think this is a low-hanging fruit one, right? So if we take a look at all of the distributions of sightings that are outside of my national security areas that I've got classified reporting for, and they generate the similar distribution map as we've got, and we put those two pieces together, now I have a holistic picture. And then, of course, our foreign partnerships, building a robust scientific community of interest to review data, capabilities, conduct analysis, expanding upon our military and intelligence collaborations across the world into the scientific and academic world. And with that, those were my thoughts. We've talked about some of these in the past. It would be interesting to hear if there's any further questions or deliberations on any of those points. And I'm happy to take any questions.
This is Dr. Kirkpatrick, head of Aero, speaking.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Kirkpatrick. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank you and the AARO for your openness in providing this committee with insight and information about what you've learned so
really
far,
open?
how we could work together. I think this is very much an area where it's going to be essential that NASA be a partner and be a good partner for AARO. And
why is it so essential?
Really want to thank you for your role.
If you're telling us that there are
in helping to start to build
ordinary explanations for almost all this, they keep telling us about why this is not worthy of study, but then they immediately tell us about all the reasons we're going to study it.
So you mentioned that you work with labs, academia. Do you see a need to go beyond what you mentioned earlier? That is the type of sensors we have right now, which are based on national security threats and certain phenomenologies and frequency ranges, these kinds of things. Do you see a reason of going beyond that?
Yep,
and
absolutely.
So what are some of the challenges you see there, materials or what have you?
So can we go back to the front slide, just the first slide where the target characterization is? So we've purpose-built a couple of sensors to do search across that. Nope, down one. There you go. That's great. To go down some of those characteristics to see if we can find them correlated to pilot reporting. Right. Some of those are initially, this is going to be, I'm going to say this is a bootstrap method, right? We're doing a broad spectrum search across very few indicators that we can point to that will enable us to get a little bit more data, refine that, narrow those sensors and go from there. So we aren't just relying on the DoD and IC sensors that exist today, because frankly, they don't point to where we want them to point, right? I mean, I'll be frank with everyone. We can point the largest collection apparatus in the entire globe at any point we want. You just have to tell me where I want to point it. Second piece of that is a lot of what we have is around the continental United States. Most people, including the government, don't like it when I point our entire collection apparatus to your backyard, right? It's not allowed. We have some laws about that, and we've got to figure out how to do this only in the areas that I can get high confidence there's going to be something there, and high confidence I'm not going to break any laws doing it. Right. So there's a trade there. So some of these ground-based point detectors are going to be necessary for that, to point up, to point out, to search. Coupled with, we're evaluating a number of sensor opportunities across different organizations, academia, industry, whatnot, that already exist or are being built for similar purposes, or maybe other purposes that I might be able to recalibrate for this and see if those will have a chance of seeing that target, right? So that's where the modeling and sim comes in. Can I take that target, put it into your sensor, and have a chance of seeing it? If I can, then I might want to use that. Right. Oh, wait.
Who's next?
Are you?
Nadia.
Go.
Hi. Thanks, Sean. I have the questions you probably don't want, which are about numbers, unless I missed them during your presentation. You had said that only a very small percentage of your cases display signatures that could be anomalous, and then followed that up with the few objects that do demonstrate potentially anomalous characteristics. What numbers are we talking about? How big is your database? How many years was it collected over? And were those observations made? And then by few, what do you mean?
Right. No, that's a great question. So this chart, as I mentioned, we've updated with our current data holdings. At the time of my open hearing, we were at 650 cases-ish. We are now over 800. We are putting together our annual report, which will be due August 1 to the Hill. And in it, and there will be an unclassified version, as there always has been, we will have those updated numbers at that time. We roughly get, I mean, you can do the math, you know, it depends anywhere from 50 to 100-ish new reports a month. Now, the reason we had such a big jump recently is because I got FAA's data integrated in finally. And so we ended up with like 100 and some odd new cases. So there's reason why it's going to fluctuate. The numbers that I would say, so we're gonna try to do a little more fidelity on some of the analytics when we report out. But the numbers I would say that we see are possibly really anomalous are less than single-digit percentages of that total database. So maybe 2 to 5-ish%. Right.
Who's next?
This is on. Hi.
All right.
I'll stand up because
I'm
I'm
gonna
on
get
the
you.
other end of the room. Thanks, Sean, for your presentation and for some of the video footage that we saw. While we're all good scientists on this panel, I think that I look at it with an untrained eye of looking at that video. And so I see 3 spots moving and everything else in the background looks like it's stable. Can you talk a little bit more about either the sensor platform or what we're seeing that's stable in the background? Because they've been identified as airplanes. And there's clear description of from other data sources that came in to help clarify that. But when I look at this, what are all of the white spots in the background that we're seeing that are stable?
So those are that's a star background. Pretty sure that's a star background. Now, so you're looking at those planes were roughly 30 to 40-ish miles away, if I remember correctly. And when you see that smaller plane that comes in at the bottom, that one was much, much closer. It was like maybe 6 to 10 miles away, right? And so the jitter in the sensor is what you're looking at.
Right. Okay. So the 3 spots, because they look like they're moving at about the same.
Right. They are.
Right. And if they were flying together, but they're not, is what I'm hearing.
They're
in
a flight line.
Right.
So they're equally spaced in a flight line, and the sensor is jittering.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Yes. Wait.
Next.
Walter's been
Yeah,
waiting.
patiently waiting. Okay, if you go to your first slide, if you don't mind, not the title slide, but the one that
trends
had
slide,
the trends. Yeah. It's the previous slide.
There you go. Thank you.
So I want to make sure I understand the slide. It says typically reported characteristics, and there are a bunch of things here, like, for example, size, altitude, speed. If it's being observed from a single sensor, use the example of like the airplanes that were coming in. And if you don't know how far away they are, how do you assess the size?
Correct.
How do you assess the speed? This is what people would report, but it isn't necessarily,
What
for
is
example,
real.
the size of the object or the speed or any of the rest of it. Do I understand that correctly?
Partially.
Okay.
So this is not all single sensor observations. Some of these are very much multi-sensor observations.
Okay.
And this is parameterized to cover the range of things for any given parameter, range of what's possible and what has been observed.
Okay. And then on the next slide, the one where you've got the, whatever it is, the meatball moving across the screen.
Right, that one.
So was there any look at sensor artifact, data processing artifact? I mean, the first thing that whenever I see anything that's anomalous, I look at how was the data collected.
Yeah. So yes, these are so this is an EO sensor on an MQ9, and we understand that very, very well. So that is a real object. Absolutely. Anna Marie.
You mentioned that in partnership with academia, you also use AI ML techniques for existing data sets, possibly some of them open source. Can you explain a little bit more what kind of AI ML techniques you're using? Are these about anomaly detection? Or are you using anything related to natural language processing? Are you using anything related to computer vision?
Right. So we're looking at a number of different capabilities that span, I think, a lot of what you've just said. So we've got, we haven't applied it yet. We are researching how we're going to apply it. So natural language processing for the reports from pilots. Absolutely. All right. Target recognition. So I can train a model to look for that thing and go back through all of our holdings and go, give me how many of these you have, right? And then try to figure out what those are. Right? So I have not put anything out there yet, or have not looked at anything yet for active targeting in real time, because I don't know exactly what I would train it to go look for. I just know what we have. So I want to get more confidence on what we have before